We all know there are 18 teams in the Big Ten. Used to be 14 before 2024, but hello, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. I'm already used to y'all being here. But I know that you and I believe and know, and the evidence bears it out, that realistically only a handful of those 18 members, and only even a handful of some of those new members from the Pac-12, can make the Big Ten championship game every year, or this year specifically. So who are those teams in 2025? Well, I want to start off by talking about the sleepers. So here are the sleepers for who can reach Indianapolis, who can play in the Big Ten championship game. This is just who can play in it. I don't think all of these teams can win it. Of course, the saying goes, whether you get to the playoffs or whether you get to the Big Ten championship game or really just any game of massive significant importance, if you get there, then it's every given Saturday. But that doesn't defeat the fact that Illinois, Iowa, Michigan State, Minnesota, and Washington, my 5 sleepers who might reach Indy and who I think have at least a 1% chance, or a 1% chance, I would say, to reach Indy, or maybe a 0.5% chance, but I can see the path if everything plays out correctly to reach Indianapolis. Not all of them can win it. In fact, on this list, I would say that the only team that could, and it depends on who their matchup is. Let's say the top teams, because the top teams in the Big Ten outside of Oregon play each other, and Oregon has a ton of road trips. Let's say that Illinois and Indiana both go 11-1. Then maybe Illinois could win it. Before we resume this segment, please take a few seconds of your time to make sure you have liked the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for the channel and for any team podcasts and playlists linked in the description, and also comment your thoughts down below in the comment section and join my Discord server via the description. All of those things I just asked you to do are completely free, and they sign you up for things related to my channel, or they don't sign you up for anything. No cost to you, and all the benefit to you because we release daily college football content here on College Football with Sam. If you want to support the channel monetarily, sign up for a YouTube membership, or check any other links in the description for my merchandise store and Patreon page. Thank you very much, and let's get back to the segment. But really outside of maybe Illinois, because of how much experience they bring back, and even then, I would never pick them to win the Big Ten. The rest of these teams on here have a 0% chance to win the Big Ten if they do make it to Indy. Washington and Illinois would be the only teams that maybe have like 1/1000th of a chance to do so because of Washington's overall talent and Illinois' overall experience. Michigan State, maybe, because the talent on offense and the staff. Minnesota and Iowa, definitely not. And I would say don't bet on any of these teams to win the Big Ten. If there's odds, to get to Indianapolis, so you pick these teams to win the Big Ten and then hedge your bet and maybe one of them makes it, then congratulations. But I like to play hypothetical. I like to go out on a limb. So again, these are sleepers for a reason, and I'm using sleeper in the extreme way, where if one of these teams completely plays to their ceiling and shocks the world, I at least pointed it out. So Illinois returns their quarterback, entire O-line, and much of their defense, and their schedule's easier. For Iowa, the logic is their schedule's tough, but they're strong in the trenches. Parker's a defensive wizard, and Gronowski could be a good quarterback. So if all those things combine and they host Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana, they're 3 biggest teams they host, maybe they can make it with 7 Big Ten wins. For Michigan State, it's another tough schedule like Iowa's, but there's no traveling on the West outside of USC, which is early in the year, and they have an elite staff. I think it's the best staff out of this bunch. Minnesota, Ohio State, and Oregon are automatic L's, but much like Iowa, the schedule's tough enough to where, what if they go 10-2 or 7-2, and they could sneak in? They can beat anyone on their schedule outside of those 2 teams, and they could have a top 10 defense plus running back unit, and if the O-line pans out, they could game control every team on their schedule to death except for the Buckeyes and Ducks. And as for Washington, what if DeMond Williams is Kyler Murray, and then combined with the play calling and the skill position players they have, they just outscore everyone, and Ryan Walters' defense is good enough to force a few punts or turnovers or sacks to where Washington overwhelms people. So That is my logic behind these sleeper picks. Now I want to dive more into what I think are the realistic options. We'll start with Indiana, who actually has the worst odds out of all of these teams to win the Big Ten. I think Indiana can make the Big Ten championship game. Preseason S&P Plus rating of a 12.2, which is 23rd. They return 62% of their production. Their win total is 8.5, coming off of an 11-2, 8-1 campaign where they lost to Notre Dame in the first round. Not going to bore you to death with the schedule specifically or do a deep dive on the roster here, but they play Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, Illinois, Iowa on the road, Oregon on the road, Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland on the road, Penn State on the road, Wisconsin at home, and Purdue on the road. It is a workable schedule. 30th per FPI in terms of schedule rank. I can see this team go 11-1 at the best. It's realistic to a certain degree because I don't think they would need lightning in a bottle to beat Oregon because it's early enough, but it is very unlikely. And their floor, they could go 7-5 or they could go under their win total and go 8-4. Again, top 25 preseason S&P Plus. They return 62% of their production. I love all of their positions, especially staff, minus one position that's right tackle with Zen Michalski. If they somehow get Zen Michalski to play to a level that I think Ohio State thought he could play at or wanted him to play at, well, then maybe 12-0 could be part of the conversation. But I'm holding off on that, especially with the limitations at team talent. I will at least in this video give you my All-Americans for each team if I do have them on an All-American list. And for Indiana, that is Fernando Mendoza, Roman Hemby on the honorable team, Pat Coogan at center, Drew Evans at guard, Carter Smith at tackle, Elijah Surratt at wide receiver, and Omar Cooper Jr., their two honorable mention. My All-American teams, and I will not repeat this for the rest of the video, so listen, they're much larger and they have more spots per team than most All-American or All-Conference teams. Always want to mention that whenever I bring it up to avoid confusion. So that's why there's a lot of Indiana players here. I think Tyreek Tucker and Dominique Ratcliffe will be there at D tackle, Michael Kamara at edge. I think Aiden Fisher will be there on the honorable mention team, Amari Farrell at safety on the honorable mention team, and D'Angelo Pons there too. So this team has a lot of high-end talent, but depth is a question, along with, again, depth plus the overall talent, top 100 players. How athletic and strong can your roster be in comparison to the Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and then in the playoffs, Notre Dames of the world? And I think they have a cap there. So that is why Indiana, that's why they have some limitations. That's why they're the lowest in odds. But the key players they have and the staff they have is why I think they're a legitimate contender to go to Indy. Next up, we have Michigan. 21.5 S&P Plus rating, which is 10th. They bring back 65% of their production, and their win total went from 8.5 to now 9.5. Juice to the under, though. Their schedule is New Mexico, at Oklahoma, Central Michigan, at Nebraska, Wisconsin, at USC, Washington, at Michigan State, Purdue, Northwestern at Wrigley Field, at Maryland, and hosting Ohio State. 29th schedule rank would be the easiest in the SEC per FPI. So that's just something to consider. Easy schedule, I think, can help them get to Indy, plus they have more talent than Indiana. When I look at Michigan, I think that it's all about the seniority of the team and the easy schedule. Somehow Indiana's schedule ranks as easier. I think that's because Indiana plays a much softer non-conference slate. They don't have Oklahoma on the road. But in terms of getting to Indy, Michigan has the much more ideal schedule. You get Ohio State at home, while Indiana gets Oregon and Penn State on the road. No matter who you are, you'd rather have Ohio State at home than Oregon and Penn State on the road. You would just, no matter what, you'd rather have that. Like USC on the road, let's even parlay this. USC on the road and Ohio State at home, or Oregon and Penn State both on the road. You'd much rather have the former. So that helps their path to get to Indy. And I like their offense in strong comparison to last year. Won't be an elite unit by any means, but I still like it. And defensively, they'll be strong again on the defensive line. All Americans I have for Michigan. I have Rayshon Benny, first-team defensive tackle. I have Derek Moore and TJ Guy at defensive end. I have Justice Haynes on the honorable mention team. and I have Yair Hill at corner, Dominic Zavada at kicker. So not as much top-end talent as Indiana. Like, I don't think their starters are as good as Indiana. And Michigan's staff is a massive question, along with offensive tackle in general, not just one tackle spot, again, like Indiana. But they have much better depth, and then an easier Big Ten schedule that should allow them a path to get to Indianapolis. This is an underrated pick, I think, to at least make the Big Ten championship game. Winning, it's an entirely different conversation because they're not Oregon, Ohio State, or Penn State. Yet again, they're only plus 1,000 odds to win the Big Ten. That is closer to Oregon than it is to the next team on the list at 5th, which is USC. So Michigan's viewed by the odds makers as closer to Tier 1 than to, say, Tier 3. They're in their own Tier 2. Next up, I want to discuss Nebraska. Nebraska, 7.5 win total, 8.9 S&P Plus rating in the preseason, which is 34th, and they return 61% of their production. Nebraska is a curious case. Matt Rule year 3, but they lose the entire defensive line, have an inexperienced DC, and then you have Dana Holgorsen as the offensive coordinator, which is a sharp turn from, a typical Matt Rule game control offense. Not saying Holgorsen won't adapt to that, but Holgorsen's not exactly known for that. Nebraska's schedule is versus Cincinnati Neutral Field and Arrowhead Stadium, Akron, Houston Christian, Michigan, Michigan State. 5 opening games that are not on the road, and Arrowhead will be more of a home game than a road game. At Maryland, at Minnesota, Northwestern at home, USC at home, at UCLA, at Penn State, Iowa at home. Only 4 road games, and all of them except for Penn State are against teams that Nebraska returns more production than, and at the same time has more talent than. And theoretically also has a better head coach than all of them per consensus rankings. So, yeah, I mean, if this isn't the year to break through and shock the world, I don't know when is, because the following year, I think they'll then be viewed by everyone as a Big Ten title contender, because if my prediction of them simply being better than last year comes to fruition, so better in power ratings, winning at least 7 games, but more likely 8 or 9, then they will be viewed as legitimate Big Ten title contenders in 2026. This year, they're kind of still flying under the radar for some people. I'm not saying that I'm picking them to go to Indy, but they can make it. I mean, again, look at the schedule. What team will they be a double-digit dog to? Well, Penn State on the road, but any Big Ten team, depending on how they pan out, if Penn State were to play to their ceiling and host any Big Ten team, and say Ohio State or Oregon have some, vomiting all over themselves moments, Penn State could beat any Big Ten team by double digits. So there's no shame in being that big of an underdog, in my mind, to a team like Penn State. They could be favored over everyone else. They're favored over Cincy. Let's say Michigan doesn't look good. They'll be favored over Michigan. They could be favored over USC even if USC looks good, as long as Nebraska looks good. It's a long ways to travel for USC. Not as much as traveling to Michigan last year or Maryland, but it's still a pretty big distance. It's 2 time zones, several states over. So this is a team that can go 11-1. Realistically, I think the ceiling's 10-2, but depending on how the Big Ten pans out, if you have a tiebreaker or if Penn State's the only really elite team and everyone else is beating up on each other, maybe 10-2 could get them to Indy, certainly get them to the playoffs. At the very worst, they could go 6-6. They're not going to go worse than 6-6 because this year's schedule, unless one of USC or Michigan is as good as Indiana was last season against teams of Nebraska's talent, then I don't see this schedule being harder than last season's. So I think this team will be a better team and have, at the very worst, the same record, but more likely than not, a far superior record. Some players for Nebraska that could be on the All-American team. I think Dylan Raiola. Dane Key is on my All-American team, honorable mention wide receiver. Ja'Cory Barney could be. And I have Sear Wright as actually one of my better corners in America. So just 2 All-Americans, and I'll reveal my All-American teams at some point. But this Nebraska team, while I don't think they have quite the overall talent whether starters or depth, that Michigan does, and certainly not the starters that Indiana does, not even close, in my opinion, outside of maybe quarterback and some receivers. I think that they're well coached, and you don't need to be that good at certain positions to get to Indy with the schedule provided. Similar to Michigan, you have questions about Matt Rule's game management, and you have questions about maybe their depth and talent. Well, look at Dylan Raiola and the Dana Holgorsen combo, along with the fact that Rule is a track record in year 3, and tell me how many teams are definitely going to beat this Nebraska team. You can't name many who will confidently beat them. All right, let us talk about Ohio State. So the Ohio State Buckeyes here won the national title last year, win total of 10.5. They're first in preseason S&P Plus with a 29.5 rating, 48% returning production. So for Ohio State, we're now entering the, no duh territory. There's a team at the end who isn't exactly no duh. I'm doing this in alphabetical order, just happens to coincide that Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State are all right next to each other. And the team at the end, I think, should be that team in the schedule and the staff, I think, screams that they could go to Indy, or at least will make the college football playoff. But we'll get to them briefly. Ohio State's a no duh to potentially make Indy. They haven't made Indy since 2020. And now if they make it, because the East and West don't exist, they would not be guaranteed to win it. However, minus 320 odds to reach the playoffs, plus 185 to win the Big Ten. They're the Big Ten favorites yet again for the 5th year in a row that they haven't won it. In 2023, Michigan was the favorite to win it all, but I think Ohio State and them were directly tied at some books to win the Big Ten. So that right there, yeah. And that game was close. That's really been Ohio State's only stumbling block to get to Indy. Every single year, if they just beat Michigan, they would have won the Big Ten probably 4 years in a row. So who's to say they can't win it this year, win the Big Ten? And even just reach Indy is an easier task now than winning the Big Ten. Even when the East and West existed, that was true, because you have to play that additional game to win it. And even though you'll go on a tangent here, even if you're favored by 21 points, there's just still that chance you slip up. Ohio State will be better than any of the previous teams we've talked about. The difference is they play a 3-game slate, Texas in week 1, Penn State week 10, and Michigan week 14, that when bunched together could be the toughest in America. Their schedule straight up is Texas, Grambling State, Ohio, at Washington, Minnesota, at Illinois, at Wisconsin, Penn State, at Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, and at Michigan. Could go 12-0, best case scenario. I think realistically it's capped at 11-1, just because of that 3-game slate and the back-to-back road games between Illinois and Wisconsin. Worst case scenario, just given again that 3-game slate, 8-4. But I think it's capped at 9-3. I think if you pick 8-4, you're an idiot. I just have it up here because sometimes the broken clock is right type deal. It's the same way I've said before, Michigan can go 6-6 or 5-7, even though I think with their schedule that won't happen. Some All-Americans on this team, Julian Sayin. I have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Innes there. Also Max Clare. I have Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles there. Caleb Downs at safety. And then I have Jermaine Matthews Jr. on the honorable mention. Also, first time for Ohio State. I have a kicker for Ohio State on the All-American team. Honorable mention, yes, but I still have Jackson Corville there. So this roster is elite. They're depth-wise very favorable. The only thing standing in their way of making it to Indy is Penn State and Michigan, and maybe if one of Illinois, Wisconsin, or Washington is really good and Ohio State is dealing with some things, that's really what stands in their way. Like, come on, they're not losing to UCLA, Rutgers, Purdue, not Minnesota, and 2 of Washington, Illinois, and Wisconsin they're beating. Because if they lose to one of those teams, then they'll be awake for the other 2. Or maybe they get through 2 and then lose to Wisconsin. I don't know. But more likely than not, if they're losing to anyone, it's to Texas, Penn State, and Michigan. Wouldn't place their odds as the best to make it to Indy. I think that Penn State and Oregon, who we'll talk about next, have better odds to reach Indy. But it would be foolish to say that Ohio State isn't a legitimate contender, and even the most down people on Ohio State, even they are still saying this is a Big Ten championship contender, because they are. Again, it's no duh, Ohio State and Indy. Speaking of also no duh, we got Oregon. So Oregon, everyone kind of forgot they went 13-0, which is a shame. Their preseason win total's 10.5, S&P Plus rating of a 24.7, return 43% of their production, which is 104th. And I got to tell you, looking at the schedule, I just said a few seconds ago they have better odds than Ohio State to reach Indy. Well, that's because they don't play Michigan on the road, and they face Penn State on the road, so that plus matchups, I think, makes it more likely that Oregon loses to Penn State than Ohio State does by quite a bit. But you would rather have that than Penn State at home and I think Michigan on the road. You would, especially given matchups. Oregon and Ohio State are both teams that just with the youth they have, some of the inexperience, you would rather play Rutgers and Iowa on the road and Northwestern as your long trip games rather than Michigan on the road. You would rather have that. It's same with Ohio State. You'd rather have I think Washington, Illinois, and Wisconsin as your road games than Michigan on the road. You still get Michigan on the road, but it just is what it is for them. It's a yearly thing. They like it that way. Oregon would too. They just, beat Michigan last year. They happen to not play them again this year. Montana State, Oklahoma State, at Northwestern, Oregon State, at Penn State, Indiana, at Rutgers, Wisconsin, at Iowa, Minnesota, USC, and Washington is their schedule. Minus 230 to reach the playoffs, and while I think they could go 8-4, and there's a realistic world where that happens, certainly 11-1 and 10-2 is more likely than that. I think 12-0 is even more likely than 8-4. 9-3 though, much more likely than 12-0. I think there's just enough trap games on the schedule to where even though I'm optimistic about much of this roster, I think that they could drop the Rutgers game. Rutgers returns a lot. It's a long travel out that way, only a few weeks after traveling to Penn State, and Oregon will have played Penn State and Indiana back-to-back weeks. And even if they roster Indiana, that will be a physical team for probably the offense to play because Indiana's defense last year was damn good. So they could lose that game. I mean, they could go to Iowa. Maybe it's snowing and it's colder a little bit earlier, and Iowa's just mad. They're angry. Their fan base is desperate, and the psychological effects of the pink locker room take place. And Oregon just comes out and Iowa beats them like they beat Ohio State in 2017 or Michigan in 16. Whether blowout or close win's a win, and it's a loss for Oregon. So this is a team that I think is more likely than Ohio State to make it to Indy, but enough trap games to where, given Penn State's experience, and we'll talk about them next, I think Penn State is the best odds out of anyone to make it to Indy. Some All-Americans for Oregon. I would have Dante Moore on the honorable mention. I have Mackay Hughes at running back, Iapani Lulu at center, Emmanuel Pregnan at guard, Isaiah World at tackle, Decorian Moore at wide receiver, Kenyon Sadiq at tight end, Mateo Uriungale and Tatum Tuioti at edge, Bryce Betcher at linebacker, Theron Johnson at corner. Dylan Thieneman is just barely off the list, but at Purdue he went through spurts of being really good or just being straight up bad. Curious to see how he pans out with Oregon. And then I have punter James Ferguson Reynolds there too. Loaded roster. I love Lanning. The way that Oregon's recruiting, if recruiting that's been the case in the Big Ten stays constant, Oregon at some point should expect to be the number one program in the Big Ten. But based on past history and past recruiting classes and the youth of this team, they're not quite at the level Ohio State has where you can just count on them to reload, and they do not have the experience or the great matchup against Penn State yet. So speaking of teams most likely to make it to Indy, I think Penn State has the greatest odds to make it to Indy. I'm picking them to win the national championship. Their win total is 10.5. Once again, juice to the under. I think that if any team would deserve to have a 10.5 win total juice to the over, it would be Penn State. Their S&P Plus preseason's a 27.7, which is third, and they return 65% of their production. The schedule is as follows: Nevada, FIU, Villanova, Oregon, at UCLA, Northwestern, at Iowa, at Ohio State, Indiana, at Michigan State, Nebraska, and at Rutgers. Minus 290 odds to reach the playoffs. I'm telling you right now, they should be higher than Ohio State's odds. They have to be, because they have a cupcake non-conference schedule, and Ohio State is Texas, and then Penn State at home and Michigan on the road, which is an easier conference slate, say, than Oregon at home and Ohio State on the road, but still, Penn State's three biggest games are not close to Ohio State's three biggest games. in my mind. I understand we're taking in the Ryan Day and James Franklin factor, but still, it's something to consider. In my mind. Big Ten odds, they're second, plus 230 right there. I'm high on everything with Penn State. James Franklin's the only question mark in my mind. They're not going worse than 10-2. They have the highest floor in football. And realistically, I think it's either them or maybe Texas or Clemson that has the highest ceiling in football. Ohio State and Oregon trailing close behind. Just think they're a little bit young compared to those teams to realistically have the number one ceiling. Could still be number one because the team who doesn't have the number one ceiling doesn't always, end up winning the title. They usually do, but that's not always how it works. Enough of my rambling, though. I'm very high on this Penn State team. I love them. And that's why even with the large list of All-American spots that I have, Penn State still dominates this. So, Aller, I have as an All-American. Same with Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Nick Dawkins, Oliva Vega-Ione. Cooper Cousins is an honorable mention. Nolan Rucci and Anthony Dunco are, and Drew Shelton was barely off the list. I have Trevor Pena and Devontae Ross there at wide receiver. Luke Reynolds is an honorable mention tight end. Zane Durant, Alonzo Ford Jr., and Ty Blanding at defensive tackle. Is it the deepest D-tackle room in America? No, but I think their starting three could end up being the best along with Clemson's. At edge, I have Denai Dennis Sutton there. Linebacker, Tony Rojas, and I am going to put Amari Campbell there. Did have Dominic DeLuca, but I'm pretty sure Campbell now is going to start over him. Zakee Wheatley. And before anyone criticizes that DeLuca take, Knowles has a reputation of developing any linebacker into being absolutely phenomenal. Just look at Steel Chambers and Cody Simon, for example, who, I don't think anyone would have predicted them to be All-American linebackers, and then poof, they were X-Factor players. Well, I don't know about Chambers, but Simon definitely was last year. I mean, Simon turned into one of my favorite players at the end of last year. Zakee Wheatley I have at safety, and then I have Elliott Washington and A.J. Harris at corner. This is a loaded team. They led my All-American teams. Only Texas was close to them, and Texas had two special teamers. So I'm very high on this team, clearly, and I think they have the best chance to make Indy and also to win the Big Ten of any Big Ten team. This is not a no-duh team, but I think USC has better odds to make it to Indy than Indiana and Nebraska for sure, and I would even say better odds than Michigan because I trust their staff a little bit more, and I actually think their conference schedule is more workable. Let's put it that way. Win total is 7.5. Preseason S&P Plus of 11, which is 30th. They only bring back 50% of their production. So why in the heck, why on the earth that God created for us, do I think that USC can do anything of note when every single year they have had worse record after worse record under Lincoln Riley? They're plus 470 to reach the playoffs. If you have money to bet, and I don't do betting on this channel, but if you have money to bet, I would advise that if you are going to pick a team to reach the playoffs, that USC is one of the best value plays. At plus 2,100 to reach the Big Ten, that's a value play too. I don't think they have the same potential as Michigan to win the Big Ten due to Michigan being bigger and still more talented, and Michigan actually might have even the better QB based on talent profile. But based on coaching, based on defensive staff, and based on receivers, USC can get there and have a better chance to win it than I think Indiana or Nebraska does. And there's a chance that Indy this year is USC versus IU. There is a world where that happens. It's unlikely as heck, but it's possible. So you could use that as a value play where you hedge the bet of them winning the Big Ten. They reach Indy and you cash out if, say, they play Ohio State or Oregon or Penn State. Their schedule is Missouri State, Georgia Southern, at Purdue, Michigan State, at Illinois, Michigan, at Notre Dame, at Nebraska, Northwestern, Iowa, at Oregon, and UCLA. Remember, that Notre Dame team, as much as Notre Dame's in Big Ten territory, they are not a Big Ten team. So that game will not count against their standings. They could go 10-2 and win 8 conference games. Absolutely straight up could do that. And I am high on a lot of aspects of this team. They could go 12-0. We already talked about how I think that, Oregon Oregon and Ohio State are similar. And even though I think from one perspective, one could argue that Ohio State could have the lower floor, in terms of talent and being able to straight up roster teams, Oregon does have the lower floor. They're younger than Ohio State. They're not quite there in terms of building their roster. I think by next year they will be, because they're recruiting better than Ohio State. I mean, even USC is right now. USC is the number one class in America, not in terms of quality, but overall, and they're top 10 in quality too, which is also why I'm bullish on USC in the future. But Oregon's their most likely loss, and that's not a guaranteed loss. If USC were playing at Ohio State, due to the travel and the fact that I think Ohio State will just be a tad bit better than Oregon against the small teams, that would be an auto loss. If USC were to travel to Michigan, I would pick that to maybe be a Michigan win. It'd be close, but Michigan returns more, Michigan's recruited better, and Michigan is going to have a much more drastic upgrade at QB than USC will this year. But they don't. They host Michigan off of a bye when Michigan doesn't have a bye. So they should win that game. And then against Notre Dame, they almost beat Notre Dame last year when Notre Dame did whatever they wanted on offense. And they returned more quality production, I think, relative to what they had last year than Notre Dame does. And Notre Dame has a huge downgrade at DC, whereas USC has either staff upgrades or staff continuity. So they could go 6-6. Maybe everything falls out and they go 5-7. Like it's the Michigan scenario. USC is the Michigan scenario, except they don't play USC on the road and they don't play Ohio State. Instead, their two toughest games are Michigan at home and Oregon on the road. And both also play Nebraska on the road, but if I'm being honest, I'd rather be USC playing Nebraska on the road to kick off November than I would be Michigan traveling out in September with my head coach suspended and possibly my freshman quarterback not knowing, his ceiling yet. I'd rather have USC's three biggest games in conference, I would say. And their head coach is better than Michigan's. Their defensive coordinator, I think Lynn, is better than Martindale. And USC, a lot went wrong for them last year. I think more than a lot went wrong for Michigan, roster-wise. Michigan improves their roster more, but again, you get the point, I believe. I look at the All-American teams that I have assembled, and I have chosen these people to be on my All-American team from USC. No quarterback, although Maeva could play himself into that, and no running back, even though I think depth-wise they're strong there. I have Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane representing USC at wide receiver. I have Eric Gentry on my first team All-American linebacker group. I have Kamari Ramsey at safety, and DJ Harvey representing the All-American corner team, and also Mekhi Lemon as a return specialist. Is USC the most talented team in the Big Ten? No. If we strictly go by talent, they're fifth. But the schedule, the staff, and the fact that Riley has won, even including last year, a career 70% of his close games, and at his worst QB production of his entire coaching career, suggests that USC might strongly regress to the mean in a positive way. That plus what I think is an easier travel schedule and staff upgrades and just what I think might be a culture shift screams that this team will, I think, definitely reach the playoffs, and they very well could reach Indianapolis. Thank you for watching College Football with Sam. Make sure that you've liked the video, subscribed to the channel, hit the notification bell for the channel and team playlists and podcasts in the description, joined the free Discord server where we talk college football 24/7, and have commented your thoughts down below. Check out the description for any ways you can support the channel monetarily. Everything else I've asked you to do is completely free, and your support means the world to me. We're trying to become the next big thing on college football YouTube. 6-figure subscribers, maybe 1 million one day. I think we can do that. And also check out any videos or playlists, anything in these columns right here, where there will be videos and playlists. Yeah, you get the point. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next one.